Hello, I'm Andrew. I'm an electronic assistive technology technician for the charity Everyone Can. But really, that means I look after all the adaptations. And if there's someone that comes into our center that can't use a standard controller, it's my job to pair them with the gadgets that mean they get to play. So, Everyone Can is a UK charity that's goal is to use gaming as a safe space to introduce children and adults to adaptations. So, as part of that, we do completely free gaming sessions for children and adults where we get them all to group up, to play games together, to socialize. And then once we've got them comfortable doing those kind of activities, we can then start approaching them with adaptations that can make playing games easier, but also everyday life. So including reading aids, environmental controls, so they can start controlling their own phone if they've previously not been able to use a mobile phone, things like that. Adaptive technology is just anything, any tool or gadget that we can use to make gaming accessible, or anything accessible really, but in terms of gaming, making gaming accessible. That could be a feature within a game, a setting that the developer has put in, or it could be an alternative input method or a gadget that we use to trick a console into working a way that we want it to. So the most common way that we use adaptive equipment is for individuals that come to our center that can't use a standard controller. That could mean that they are missing a limb requirement or unable to use both hands to hold a controller, or it could be that they're not able to manipulate their fingers fast enough to press buttons, or the reach or the pressure of holding a controller could be too much for them. For those individuals, we're able to help split the controller up into various parts and then give them different tools and devices to use to fill in those parts, those functions. So that could be as simple as earlier today, I set up someone playing Forza where he was racing around the track using a switch at the back of his head to accelerate and things like that, because holding a controller would just not be possible for him. Really, it breaks down into what kind of input we're trying to achieve, whether it's pressing a button or holding a switch or lever, whether it's a joystick. And then there's different approaches based on that. When it comes to joysticks, the most common joystick people will see an individual using, if they're not using a standard controller, would be an UltraStick 360. You can get the joystick itself from arcade manufacturers. So the cheapest and easiest way to get it started is to go to someone that makes arcade cabinets and just buying the joystick wholesale. It then comes with a USB cable, and it's as easy as just plugging it into an adaptive controller. And if you plug it in on the left, then you've got a left joystick. If you plug it in on the right, you've got the right joystick. Different tools that we would use would be switches, and they could be anything as simple and basic as a big red button, as opposed to the little button that you would have on a keyboard or a gamepad. That could be a proximity sensor, so one of these where if you get close enough, it will beep, but you don't have to make any physical contact. Or it could be a sound switch, so you make a loud noise and that will trigger it. It could be eye tracking for pointing devices and things like that. So where you look at on the screen, it will record, and that can be mapped to pressing keys, buttons, joystick movement, targeting. We even have a device that's quite a fancy creature. This is called the Game On by Praetorian. What this does is it plugs into an Xbox adaptive controller, but it picks up the signals emitted by someone's communication device. So if there's an individual that uses a screen to communicate, if it's got an environmental control module, we can put a game controller on their screen. They can look at the screen or control that. We're using their normal communication method, and then that will output to Mario Kart or whatever game we've plugged them into. And it's great that nowadays we're starting to use video games with people's speech and language therapists to help improve someone's ability to speak by playing original Mario and things like that. It's quite exciting. It's the easiest it's ever been, and a big part of that is thanks to Microsoft. When they launched the Xbox Adaptive Controller, they kind of set a precedent that forced a lot of companies to follow suit. The Xbox Adaptive Controller didn't do anything that was not possible beforehand, but what it did is it made it accessible and through a first-party provider. So rather than having to force a console into accepting something or jerry-rigging and duct taping something together, we had something that was cost-effective, because what came before this was usually averaging around £400. This is about £75, and would just work first time. So it's really, really easy to get started into accessibility. What I would recommend, though, is look for a local service like the one that we offer in the UK, because it's much better to try the devices before you buy them. It's really successful, in all honesty, and I think we're pretty soon going to start seeing people with disabilities competing on an equal playing field, now that there are adaptations out there that mean they're not having to play a lesser version of a game. They can play the same Call of Duty title in the same tournament. All it needs is for the tournament to accept an Xbox Adaptive Controller or make allowances for their equipment to be slightly different. The basic function's still going to be there. It's still going to be someone choosing when to press the button at the right time. The skill requirement is going to be the same. And it's just a case of learning to play with a different controller. I think it's absolutely vital, especially for gaming, because gaming isn't an activity for children or things like that. It's part of our society, and it's a part of our culture nowadays. And to ring fence that for anyone with a disability is just so horrifically othering, that I don't think it should be allowed, especially when it's so easy to make gaming accessible. It realistically, these are virtual worlds, virtual environments, activities that we have created with endless possibilities. And so when there is one of these worlds that isn't accessible to an individual, it's because someone actively chose not to make it accessible. And I don't think that's really forgivable, really, especially when we can all be together in this. And the voices of people with disability can help make these environments better. These other opinions, these other thoughts that people wouldn't have considered, wouldn't have been able to voice because they wouldn't have been there, can really help make big changes. And this will become more apparent as things go more digital with like VR, AR, and the metaverse and the greater reaches of that. I would like to see more options in games. We've had some really, really big breakthrough games like Forza Horizon 5, the latest version, where you can almost play the entire game with just one or two buttons. You can set the cars to try and stay on the racing line, and the car will steer for you, and all you have to do is manage the acceleration. But at the same time, whether you win or lose that race is down to your skill. If you're not accelerating and braking at the right points, you're not going to succeed. And so the sense of achievement from someone who's playing with no adaptations and is playing the game the way it comes as default is the exact same achievement as someone with a very severe disability that is playing with all the adaptations that we can provide for them, making it truly available for everyone to get that experience, get that reward factor. So more down that route and less kind of token effort games, because in the past, accessible games have always been there, but they've been kind of patronizing, and they've not been made by the AAA developers. They've not been made by gamers. And I think an inclusive way forward by developers is just the way forward, and it looks like we're going that way.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like, share and subscribe buttons to our channel. If you want more content like this, visit our website britishesports.org, and you can find links to all of our other social media accounts in the description down below.